Okay, hello and welcome everyone on this Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much for joining this fireside chat. My name is Fahad Aziz. I'm a board member of Open Silicon Valley chapter. I'm also a contributor to Forbes magazine where I talk about healthcare technologies. I'm very excited about this fireside chat and my guests today. Before I introduce them, a bit of housekeeping. You're gonna all the attendees, you're gonna be on mute. We'll not be able to hear you during this presentation. However, you can leave your questions in Q&A, and we have allocated time towards the end of this presentation where we will be answering your questions. Okay, so we encourage you to leave questions and we would help. We're very happy to answer them. Um, Few weeks back, we stumbled upon a Forbes article recognizing and highlighting two Pakistani women about a grassroots movement that they have started. The article was not about their career, was not about their experiences or their jobs. It was about an organization, a mission that they have started to empower women financially all across the globe. We were obviously very fascinated by what they're doing and reached out to them and invited them to join us in this fireside chat. So please join me in welcoming Rabiya, Ather, and Zabreen Khan. They are the founders of HerCapital. Um, and I'll let Rabiya and Zabreen. Can you, before we talk about HerCapital, and let me stop this screen share so we can see you. Great. Before we talk about HerCapital, can you talk a bit about your journey? You know, your childhood, the choices that you made in colleges, in your job and experiences, and what you are doing today. So please walk us through your journey.
Yeah, I can get started. Thank you for having us, Fahad. We really appreciate it, and we're super excited to be here. Zabreen and I both grew up in Pakistan, and we both went to school in Lahore. And I can talk a little bit about my journey, and then Zabreen, I'll let you speak about yours. But I grew up in Lahore, went to high school in Lahore, and went to an all-girls high school. And I am one of four sisters, and so I grew up surrounded by a lot of women, and very strong and inspiring women. And I think in some way that manifested itself in me when I moved over to the U.S. and I moved here for college. I think that upbringing of being surrounded by so many strong, inspiring women. I had always just grown up not really thinking about, even though I was growing up in Pakistan, not really thinking about the differences between the opportunities or the access that women have versus men. But I think when I came to the United States, ironically, that was my first that was the first instance where I started noticing some of the differences in access and socialization that exists between women and men. And I think that feeling became much stronger when I was in the professional world, when I left college and started working in finance. And I think what happened there was I started realizing, one, I was one of very few women on the trading floor in my day job. And I started noticing, small differences in how women were treated versus men when it came to the workplace. And I started reading more about things like the gender pay gap. And that led to me reading more about the gender investing gap. And so I think it's quite funny, like someone from Pakistan noticed gender differences and gender dynamics more so in the United States, in New York, working on a trading floor. But that's a little bit of my journey of, I grew up in Pakistan, very supported, very empowered, and then came to the United States and realized, at the heart of the financial services sector in New York, in the US, there are actually very stark discrepancies between women and men and how they're treated and how they act. And so I think that's just kind of a little interesting kind of insight of what I experienced.
Great.
Thanks, Rabiya, and thanks, Fahad, for having both of us here. So as Rabiya mentioned, I also grew up in Lahore. That's where I was born and raised, and I came to the US for school as well. So I moved to the US now almost 10 years ago. I spent some time in the Northeast, and then I spent 4 years in California where I attended Stanford. And it was really at Stanford that I got exposed to technology and the venture capital industry. and knew that that was a career path that I wanted to take. And, you know, outside of work and outside of school, I had always had an affinity for women's focused groups. And so while in college, even back home in Pakistan, and when I would go back for the summers, I would try to volunteer at girls' schools. And girls' education was one thing that was instilled in me. And, you know, I was brought up knowing that my education was my ticket to freedom and independence and, you know, really building a career for myself. And so knowing that I had those privileges, I knew I wanted to give back to other women and, you know, volunteer at girls' schools. And so that was my first kind of experience helping women and being part of women's groups and being surrounded by women. Similar to Rabiya, I grew up in a house with a lot of matriarchs and a lot of strong and powerful women that thankfully I was able to look up to and that inspired me as role models. And so, you know, I was always brought up with the notion that I am on equal footing as my brother and my male cousins, and, you know, I can accomplish anything that they can accomplish. And in your family, you might be told that, but oftentimes society, you know, tells you something differently. And so similar to Rabiya, I, you know, started noticing these discrepancies between how women are treated and how men are treated, and just burdens that I think women carry as they move through the world. And then coming to the US, a place where you think is so far ahead in terms of gender equality, you notice very subtle ways, particularly I think in the workplace, that you would not imagine existed here. I think much more so once I started my professional career, I started realizing that there are certain disadvantages that women have to face when advancing through their careers that maybe are not as present in a school environment in the US. And so moving into my professional career is when I started noticing and actually experiencing some of those things myself. Right out of school, I first worked at Facebook in a sales role and business development role. And then I moved into the venture capital industry. And it was that transition from tech to finance when I realized that, you know, being in a male dominated industry and working with men and interacting with men and in tons of meetings, I realized that especially in the finance world, women are at an extreme disadvantage as compared to men. And that was very different from my experience on the business side at Facebook, where I think my team had far more women than men. And so that's what opened up my eyes to not just in the professional world in finance, women being at a disadvantage, but I started noticing my male colleagues and my male peers were having so many conversations about personal finance and about the stock market and about investing that my female peers and friends weren't having. And I felt like I was at a disadvantage because here I am, you know, 22 years old at the time in the finance industry, professionally investing on behalf of, you know, our LPs, and yet I didn't know how to build out my own personal portfolio. And so when I thought about other women who are in, you know, different career paths, not in finance, they must really be at an even further disadvantage because they're not exposed to the lingo or the jargon that comes with the finance world. And so that's when Rabiya and I started talking about, you know, building a nonprofit and an organization that provides resources specifically targeted to women to help them in their personal finance journeys and educate them on investing. Because unfortunately, these topics aren't taught to us. They aren't taught to women. They aren't even taught to men in school. And so I think men tend to learn these things just in conversations with other men, with their peers, and are socialized to learn what to do with their money, but women aren't. And so that's really what we're doing here at HerCapital.
And I think at some level, Fahad, just to add to that, I think at some level, our day jobs, because we were in this industry, empowered us. I mean, despite the challenges that come by, you know, by being in a male-dominated industry, you get confidence when you're investing on behalf of, you know, large institutional clients, which is what I was doing, or if Zabreen is looking at companies and evaluating them. You become much more confident in your own ability to learn and to understand and to put aside the jargon, which I think scares or intimidates a lot of women. And so in some ways, I think we got empowered through our day jobs and then started thinking, okay, well, we feel pretty competent and comfortable doing this for other people as professionals. Why are we so underconfident and shy about approaching our own personal finances. So I think in some ways, it's interesting, but we were compelled to think about this problem and compelled to force ourselves to learn about personal finance because we were professionally investing, on behalf of our clients.
Right. That's a great point. Even, at social gatherings, we would see that men are talking about stock exchange, they're talking about Bitcoins, crypto, and that's a norm. Very rarely we would see a woman having those discussions. Yes, they are talking a lot about gender inequality in their workplaces. They're talking about discrimination, and that concerns them. But you made such a good point that if you are financially independent, then that's where game changes, because now you have more power, you have more stakes in the game, and you cannot be just pushed around. So
Yeah.
when this epidemic started last year, and people had more time at home in lockdown, many of us started watching Netflix, and many of us started doing things that we haven't done before. Why both of you decided to start this movement, which is not an easy thing. Unlike technology, you build technology and you make it available to people. This is a movement where you have to meet people one at a time. You have to be in the trenches all the time. So walk us through that thought, the process on how you guys sat down on a dining table and say, you know what, we're going to make a change. We're going to make an impact.
So we actually launched HerCapital. We did a soft launch in late 2019, and at that point, Rabiya had been working in finance for several years. I had been working in finance for a little over a year, and during that time, we kept having these conversations, and we thought, we were at a restaurant in New York, and we thought, we keep having this conversation. We've talked to our friends about it. They agree with us. Why don't we look into the research and actually see if this is a widespread problem? And so that's when, we started looking into studies that have been done before, and we saw that on average, women invest 40% less than men. Over 70% of their assets remain in cash over the entirety of their lives, meaning they aren't putting that money in a portfolio or investing it so that it grows over time. It's just sitting static and actually depreciates if it's sitting in a savings account. And so when we realized that the research is matching a lot of what we were seeing in our personal lives, we figured, why not start something around this? And there are a lot of women's movements and, different aspects of gender equality that people are trying to target, but we felt personal finance was one that was not receiving a lot of media attention. People weren't necessarily talking about it. And actually, I think many people didn't even realize that this is an issue unless they felt it themselves and started looking into it. So that was the impetus to start something. And, we did the soft launch in 2019. And then at the start of 2020, before COVID hit and before the pandemic really, became present across the world, we were going to launch by having more in-person events focused in New York and then expand from there on out. And then, our first in-person event was scheduled for March, and that's when all of New York shut down. And that's when we decided that we would have to really pivot. And we noticed a lot of organizations were having virtual meetups, and, ourselves, we were spending so much more of our time behind a screen. And so we figured, why not take advantage of the momentum and the time that people have at home and be virtual first? And looking back, I think that was a blessing in disguise, because we were able to reach far more women far faster than if we were doing in-person events. And so we started with those virtual events. We onboarded a team of now 20 women who volunteer with us. And because it's remote first, you can do it from California, you can do it from New York, you can do it from London, you can do it from Pakistan. It allows us to engage with so many more women and also attract a much more international audience. So I think that has been super helpful for us. And I agree with you, Fahad, having some of those one-on-one conversations, though, nothing can replace that. And so what we're starting to do now is starting to have more one-on-one interactions beyond just our large-scale virtual events, having small groups with women who are coming together to talk about money and talk about investing. So groups of 5 to 10 women. And then, once the pandemic is behind us, hopefully we'll start sprinkling in some more in-person meetups, because nothing can take away, face-to-face interaction. That's really important. But I think as an organization, we'll continue to be virtual first because it really allowed us to grow and help more women at a much faster rate.
And I think one aspect of kind of the virtual first launch that surprised us, and I think I agree with Zabreen, it was a blessing in disguise, is, we had started focusing on New York because we were working in New York, we were living in New York, and we thought the problem, we had felt this problem in the city, and so why don't we target that geographical region to start? But the impressive thing is that we actually have gotten a lot of interest from women in India, in Pakistan, in Australia, in South Africa. And so it's just amazing to see how global this problem is. And, women recognize that it's a problem, and women recognize that they should be financially independent. And so we get very thoughtful and very important questions from women, in Pakistan, in India, in Australia, like I said. And so it's just very empowering to think that, you can have a global impact and people all over the world actually recognize the problem and want to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we understand the concept. We understand, the effort that you guys have put in. Can you tell us a little bit about what the program is? If I want to join the program, how does it work?
So, as Zabreen mentioned, we are a virtual first community. I think the number one thing that we noticed and that we tried to bring to our audience was that even when women realize that financial independence is important, and even when they realize that there is a value to investing your money or to, potentially gaining more than just a very small sort of savings rate on your savings, there are barriers to entry. So it's very difficult for women to know how to start. It's the resources that are available are actually quite off-putting to a lot of women and can be confusing. There was a study done recently by BlackRock where they said that more than 65% of non-investor females find the existing financial resources available online extremely difficult to understand. There's also studies that show that when women do invest, they actually invest better than men. So there was a study done on about 500,000 people to see how men and women performed right after or around the financial crisis. And women on average invested 4 to 6% better than men in that time period. So, there's no lack of capability, but the resources that are available are actually very difficult and off-putting. And so the number one thing that we tried to target when we first launched was to create resources or to provide information in a way that's appealing to women and does not feel like work. It's much more natural in terms of how they access that information. And, as Zabreen and I were in our own demographic, and our team is also in that same kind of age range of millennial women that have just started working, we were kind of the best case studies for what we were trying to build. And we realized that we spend a lot of our time on platforms like Instagram, which has aesthetic and appealing content. And it's often very informative if it's things about healthcare or if it's things about, just what's happening in the world in terms of current affairs. It's all put in front of you in an appealing and fun way. And so that was a brand that we wanted to create around this content, which we think doesn't exist right now. And so really the number one thing that we bring to the women in our community is financial education, financial resources in a way that's appealing and inviting and comforting. And so, some of the things that our community members have said are things like, I feel extremely comfortable and I've realized that this stuff is not complicated. But that is not the message that you get when you are, on Reddit reading a Wall Street Bets, blog. It's a very different tone. And so what we've tried to do is make it accessible and fun through our social media. So we have an Instagram platform, we have a Twitter, through our website where we have a number of online resources for women. So if you don't know where to start, we've created a curriculum where there's Unit 1, which gives you the basics, Unit 2, which teaches you about investing, so on and so forth. And also an international section, which shows you if you're living in Pakistan and you want to invest in the US, or if you're living in the US and you want to access the Canadian and Indian markets, how can you do that? And so it's really basic information that we've gathered and curated in a way that's actually inviting and interesting for women. And then the third thing that we're doing is online and virtual events. So getting together interesting women in the financial services industry and having them speak about their own personal finance journeys and also talk through the basics of personal finance. And that's on our YouTube. So that's another aspect of what we bring to our community.
Just adding to what Rabiya said, she highlighted 3 pillars of how you can get involved with HerCapital. One is through social media and following along, because that's where we provide a lot of our information about our programming, and we provide bite-sized content as it relates to personal finance. And so when you're doing something like scrolling through Instagram and seeing posts about someone traveling and a new fashion item that just launched, you can also get a tip about investing in the stock market, which I think is valuable, because we're trying to get women where they're already spending time, as Rabiya said. So social media is one. The second pillar, as Rabiya mentioned, is our website and our online resources and curriculum. And then the third pillar would be our virtual events and signing up for those. Beyond that, ways to get involved would be subscribing to our newsletter. We also have programs that recently launched. So we launched this week a campus ambassador program for women who are in school or even in the workplace who would like to spread the message about personal finance, can come on as a HerCapital ambassador and work with us and work with our team to spread that message and kind of be the spokesperson in your own community. And then we've also recently launched a Money Talk series, which brings together those groups of 5 to 10 women that I was mentioning, where you can actually interact and speak to other women in the community and share, tips and advice, and also ask questions about, hey, what worked for you when you just graduated from college? Or how are you thinking about your retirement savings? Or what are you doing with your student loans? These are all very important questions. And I think sometimes hearing it from an expert is very helpful, like what we do on our YouTube channel and through our large scale virtual events, but then also hearing it from your peers who are your age and going through it with you, I think has really resonated with women. So that's another way of getting involved, is signing up for one of those sessions.
Oh, that's great. I can relate to it. When I was young and I was in New York, I always thought that this credit card belongs to me and all the balance and all the credit is mine and I can spend it and I'll take care of it later, only to find out after a few years that was a very bad decision because I had no education on personal finance by anyone at that time. And years later, I often share this with my friends. There should be some personal financing classes, education for students in college, so they understand that this credit card doesn't belong to you. This is not your money. So I'm so glad that not only you're reaching out to women, but also trying to get out to people when they're in college. When we were talking about this session earlier this week, you shared some very interesting examples of your members coming out with their personal concerns and stories on how they are aware and how they want to invest. Can you share some of those examples with us?
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that's been really educational for both Zabreen and I think this whole journey has been, but it's been looking at the types of questions that we get from women in different parts of the world. And so I was alluding earlier to, us having members in Pakistan, India, etc. But, a lot of women in Pakistan will come to us and ask us about gold and investing in real estate. And that tends to be a very important topic and an important area for women that are trying to save and invest in Pakistan. In the US, it's extremely dominated by retirement savings and thinking about, things like stock options if you're in the tech world, how do those work, understanding individual sort of single stock investments and, how you diversify your portfolio. And, in the UK and Australia, developed markets, it's very similar. So one thing that's been extremely educational and helpful for us is to think through, okay, well, clearly there are things that have been socialized much more so in some parts of the world, but there is a value to educating other women in other parts of the world on the concerns that they don't have. So what we've tried to do, as I mentioned, is build out more of an international resource section on our website and on our social media, where we educate women on the questions that other women in other parts of the world are asking, so that we can share that information, and so that women, the things that are socialized, you think about them a lot more, but the things that are not top of mind, maybe you're missing out on returns or potential investment ideas because they're just not discussed amongst your group of friends or in the media, et cetera. And so I think one huge value add that we've been able to bring to our members is that we are international. And so when we write about gold or Bitcoin, people in the US maybe don't think about gold as much, but this is now forcing them to think about gold. And when we write about Bitcoin or GameStop, people in India, Pakistan, who maybe weren't thinking about it are, that becomes top of mind for them. So and we've gotten that feedback from our audience as well, is the kind of global nature of what we're doing. And again, Zabreen and I have that background as well. And Fahad, you do also. And so it's just been really, inspiring and empowering to see that happen.
Okay, so we're going to shift gears for a few minutes. So since you talked about GameStop, so you guys, you guys are in New York. You're very close to the Wall Street. We know what happened. We don't have to talk about that. What if you have to speculate what's going to happen next? Because there's a lot of concerns that this is going to not end well for many people. There are bigger players. They know how to play around. How would you speculate? What are your thoughts? What's going to happen next?
$1 million question. But I think, the thing that I have been reflecting on this whole week is how much things are changing because of access to information and because of technology. And, everything that's happened here or what we've been able to accomplish with HerCapital, we are so dependent now in a positive way, I think, on and access to information is actually like more widespread and larger than it has ever been. And I think that is, in the long run, in my opinion, I think it's positive for the markets, and hopefully it's positive for, things like income inequality and access to financial independence. So, I think these conversations coming to the forefront, there's definitely a positive aspect of it. And actually, Zabreen and I were talking about this with somebody yesterday, but the fact that, my mother is asking me about GameStop and is asking me what shorting a stock means is a good thing, in my opinion, right? Because you're really getting the mainstream person who would not ideally, or who would not have thought more about Wall Street or investing beyond, what's in the media. This stuff is not being talked about. And, individual investors realize that they have real access to these markets, and they can make real, life-changing decisions. That said, I think there is a lot of focus on this, and that can also have some negative externalities or negative consequences. And so what we've been doing as an organization is, obviously educating our community on what's happening, but at the same time educating them on the risks of single stock investing or trying to time the market. It's a very interesting concept theoretically, and buying high or selling high and buying low. Everyone wants to do that, but statistically and in practice, it's actually very hard. So our focus for our community has been much more so on longer term investing and much more so on goal setting and financial security. So while this is interesting, and I think we're living through like a historic moment, and it's highlighting the importance of technology and information access, I think at the same time, our demographic, interestingly, cares less about day trading and cares less about trying to, make a lot of money on single stock names, and cares a lot more about goal setting and longer term investing. So, if there are opportunities to buy longer term investments like Apple that have, come off alongside the rest of the market, that is what we've been focused on, much more so than encouraging people to get involved in like kind of, market volatility on a daily basis. I think that's not necessarily the conversation we are having on our platform. But personally, I think it's quite interesting, and I think there's pros and cons, and you have to be extremely careful if you are involved to fully understand the risks around options trading and single stock trading and whatnot.
And one other thing I'd add to that, we had a session actually at HerCapital before the end of 2020 that focused on the importance of behavioral finance and how people actually approach their financial decisions in investing. And I think it was fascinating. And a lot of what we talked about then, I think, is playing out in this week right now. in the fact that so many people are hearing about GameStop and reading about it, and hearing what the potential upside could be, that they have FOMO, they have a fear of missing out on this money. And so I think on the one hand, it's good for those people who are saying, okay, I'm going to educate myself on this. And if I'm missing out on investing in the stock market or making decisions about my money where it could potentially grow over time, I should be learning that jargon. And instead of being afraid of it, realizing that a lot of normal people like me are involved in these types of conversations. So let me go out and educate myself. I think that's the best outcome.
Yeah.
But then I think there's also a bad outcome where people genuinely feel like, oh my God, if someone is making thousands of dollars on shorting a stock, maybe I should do that. And they're making irrational or impulsive decisions, not having enough context or education around this topic. And that's where I think you could go down a slippery slope. So as Rabiya mentioned, I think on our platform and through HerCapital's resources, we really want to make sure people are educated about their investment decisions and are not impulsive about it, and are making more long-term decisions as opposed to trying to get those short-term wins without really knowing what the repercussions could be. And I think generally what's happening really highlights the importance of how much of our bias and personal feelings and behavior factors into our financial decisions. And it's really fascinating to look into behavioral finance and look at kind of the triggers that get people to do something versus not do something. And so I think that session, if you're curious about any of this, it's on our YouTube, and we did it in partnership with a Bay Area wealth management firm called Experian. But it provides interesting perspective, and I think really aligns with some of the things happening today and in the media.
Right. You made a good point. One has to be careful. I remember when the financial crisis of 2008, the first thing that the regulators did, they stopped the short selling. And at that point, there was this feeling that short selling is never going to come back, only to find out a few years later it was back and it's up there. So yeah, this is great. We're going to see some more regulations come in, but one has to be careful. The big guys are going to get their way out. So you have to play smart. And it also reminds me of the Arab Spring. It was a crowdsourced movement where people came together, and it had its share of losses too. In this case, now people are actually putting their money in. Very similar concept. But what really concerns me is that there are young people who are investing their money, and they don't understand that they could be played, and played very well. So we're going to come back to HerCapital now. Thanks for your feedback on a topic that was a little irrelevant to this discussion. If you are working with thousands of people, and if you want to grow to hundreds and thousands of people, what are your challenges, and how can a community like Open and members of Open can help you?
So I think growth, and Zabreen and I talk about this a lot, but growing on social media platforms in today's environment is actually extremely hard. And I think it's probably because there are a lot of distractions. And even if you have very good content and a very clear value proposition, people have a lot of different directions in which they can, spend their time and their energy and their eyes when it comes to social media platforms. And so, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on is member engagement and community growth. And, we've found that partnering with organizations like Open, and, we've worked with a lot of female focused organizations as well, has been a great way for us to grow, and has been a great way for us to get more people to find out about us. So I think, that is probably the number one thing that we have focused on. And I think that's probably the number one thing that Open members can help us with is partnering with us so that we can get our message out to more women. Because I think, at the core, the services that we are providing, I like to think that they're useful, and that they are, the feedback that we get from any new members that join our community is always positive. But I think the challenge is getting that message to more women, and making sure we get enough eyes on what we've already created or what we have in the pipeline. And so, to the extent that folks can partner with us or can spread the message, I think that would be a huge help to us in getting the word out and getting more people to learn about our mission and what we've created so far. I don't know, Zabreen, if you have any other kind of thoughts on what else we could use for help.
Yeah, I think larger scale partnerships, of course, that allows you to go from 1 to 10 very quickly, and we more than welcome access to opportunities or partners who would like to, who resonate with our mission and would like to work with us. But I think what we found is the power of word of mouth and sharing it with your friends is also incredible. So many women, will send a HerCapital post to their 10 closest female friends, or they'll post about it on their Twitter, on their Facebook. They'll say, look what I discovered, founded by 2 Pakistani women. If you want to get your finances in order, reach out to them or work with them or follow them. And I think even just the power of word of mouth has helped us grow. And so, especially as it relates to growing across the Pakistani community, really the reason why that part of our audience grew, even though in the beginning we were, a US focused organization, is because of our own networks and our own community and our friends and family in Pakistan and in America who were, spreading the message to their peers, their colleagues, their friends, their families. So I think just doing that even will help us go the extra mile, and particularly I think help us grow our Pakistani footprint even further.
That's great. Well, you have the support of Open Silicon Valley. We have our conference once a year, and it's attended by over 1,000 people. We're planning to do that in fall this year, and we would love to have you come and present and be one of the panelists. So you have all the support from Open Silicon Valley and other chapters of Open. So we have a few questions, so let's go to them. And I know the answer to the first one, but I'll let you guys answer that. Are you monetizing through sponsorships? How did you raise funding to hire talent to grow your company?
So HerCapital, just for some context on the logistics of the organization, we're a registered 501c3. So we're a registered nonprofit in the United States, which means at this point, all of the resources we're providing to women are actually free of cost. So sponsorships are a very important part of allowing our organization to grow. We're lucky though, in terms of the talent and the people working on HerCapital, it's actually being done free of cost. So everyone who is a team member of the organization, putting on our programs, running our social media, they're volunteer based. So just like Rabiya and I, we're working full time and doing HerCapital on the evenings and on the weekends. And, we love devoting our free time to it. Same with our team members. So they're either full-time students, they're full-time professionals, or they're freelancers. And, they're doing it to give back and help women. So we're really lucky to have an amazing team of 20 female volunteers. But in terms of the sponsorship side, we have gone out to raise money from corporate sponsors. We started doing that in late 2020. We're very grateful for the sponsorships that we've secured so far. And I think 2021, hopefully, will be a big year where we focus and double down on the sponsorship side. And I think having that sponsorship money enables us to reach more women and grow the mission beyond what we're already doing. So I think it'll continue to be a focus. But we've done our best to connect with individuals who are who have their own networks, who can point us to the right people at different organizations. And we haven't been afraid of even the cold emails. We'll cold email tons of people, and maybe you'll email 10 one day and get a response from one. But I think for us, it's really having a large top of the funnel where you reach out to a ton of people who you think could be helpful to your organization. And we've been very pleased to find that many people are willing and are able to help. And then some of those conversations turn into sponsorship conversations and allow us to actually build funding for the organization and help it grow. So that's what we've been doing so far.
Great. Okay, so we have another question. Are you partnering with other organizations or companies to recommend financial products for women? Because products can be confusing.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, we try very hard to not make any recommendations, and we try very hard to stay on the kind of in terms of the spectrum to be more on the educational side and to educate women on the options, and then hopefully they have enough information to make their own decisions. So we definitely suggest options of, or I shouldn't use the word options, but we definitely suggest various types of products or various apps, for example, for budgeting, or if you're thinking about investing, we'll give you information on different platforms that you can use. But we try to stay away from recommending specific products simply because it's actually quite difficult to make specific recommendations without knowing an individual's uh, detailed financial background and situation. So, but I think one thing that we have recommended quite openly is a partner that is also one of our sponsors, but they align quite well with our mission. Is a trading platform called Public, and the reason why we've recommended them or encouraged our members to go on that platform is because we think they have a good mix of letting people access investing whilst also creating a community and providing educational resources. And the community and educational aspect of what they're offering, we think is quite good and quite in line with how we've approached our platform. And so that's one kind of app that we like. A few other apps that we like, and these are not financial products, but you'd be surprised how important these are before you actually start buying, securities. And so things like using maybe Mint for budgeting and keeping track of your money. That's another one that we like to recommend. There are a number of others, YNAB, Clarity Money, just to make sure that you get the basics right before you start, buying Facebook or whatever stock that you want to buy. And so we definitely recommend goal setting and recommend figuring out what you are trying to invest for before you start investing, because the trap, I think, is like Zabreen said, when people have FOMO or they feel like they're missing out on money, they just want to go open up an account and start buying things. But it's extremely important to first take a step back, evaluate your financial goals, your particular situation, and then figure out, what you do from there.
And how much loss can you manage?
Absolutely.
Right.
And how much of a, emergency fund do you have? And, how much are you saving consistently? I mean, one thing that we love to say at HerCapital is, time in the market is trumps timing the market. So the earlier you start and the more methodical and systematic you can be about investing and saving, the better off you'll be in the longer run, as opposed to trying to time the market and take advantage of random opportunities that come up. So we really like to focus on that and recommend people to have kind of longer term vision.
Okay. So what I heard was that you don't recommend any stocks yet. Once you have millions of users, that's when you're gonna rally stocks. Okay, we
Yeah,
have
I mean, yeah, who knows where we take
uh,
this, but I think at the moment we are very focused on education and very
mm,
focused on giving people, women, and men, whoever's on our platform, all the information that we think is essential, and then they make their own decisions.
right. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, we have few more questions. Would you be open to developing a curriculum for youth that parents can use? Even tip sheets for parents, how they can help teach good budgeting skills.
Personally think that's an amazing idea, and I wish more parents took control of teaching, their kids budgeting and saving before they went off to college. So for now, most of our audience tends to be 18 plus. So I think when women hear about HerCapital or join HerCapital, they tend to either be in college and starting to think about depending on themselves and earning their own money, or they're older and have been in the career force for a couple of years. But one area we haven't yet touched on is, high school, elementary, middle school kids, because we felt those conversations maybe aren't happening as much at the younger level because those kids aren't making money themselves. But I'm 100% on board for parents kind of teaching it to their kids. And so I think we'll definitely, put that in our back pocket and write it in our list of things that we could potentially launch in the future. We definitely have been working on creating worksheets and just one pagers that individuals can use. And so maybe one targeted to parents, I think would be a great step. But I love that idea. And I think, it's so important for families to start having those conversations, because at HerCapital, we really believe there's nothing, there's no such thing as being too young. The earlier you start learning about this, even if you aren't, investing $100, but you're just learning how to budget your money or even your allowance, I think you start understanding and adopting those habits that are going to stick with you over time. And so much of the feedback we get is we wish we had learned these things earlier. And so I love that, this parent is trying to teach their kids. So we will definitely work on something like that.
And I think, I mean, interestingly, Zabreen and I have had some conversations with kind of education focused groups, and they're very, very early stages, but we have been discussing potentially working with teachers or education providers. And a lot of those are actually women. So a vast majority of, high school and elementary school teachers tend to be women, and those industries are generally, dominated by women. And so we have been having some discussions around educating the educator, and then hopefully that has like a trickle down effect and ends up being taught in schools or being discussed with children. So I think the parent angle, like Zabreen said, is actually very smart and is a good idea.
Great. So, I think this is our final question, and then we're gonna close. Um, you have a full-time job. You probably have families, really busy in the day, living in New York City. Can only imagine. How do you pull this off? How do you manage all these things? And tell us so that other panel, other guests that we have on the listening to you can get some inspiration.
I think one piece of advice I'd say, and what I've learned throughout this journey, is that you can always give yourself a reason as to why you shouldn't start something and why you are busy and you have too many responsibilities. And I 100% felt that. And I think the hardest part is actually sitting down and building something and taking the first step to do it. And then once you do and you get positive feedback, or you get people who resonate with your mission and think it's a good idea, or some people may not, but that's part of the process, is also failing. But I think taking that first step is what's most important. And if it's something that you really, really care about and you're passionate about, doing it outside of work and doing it on your weekends, doing it in the evenings, will actually bring you a lot of joy. So I think for me and Rabiya, we look forward to being part of conversations like this, or working with our team, or answering a question of a woman who's reached out to us and shared her story. For us, it doesn't feel like work, like your day job might. It actually is very enjoyable. And I think because we care about the mission so much, and we are so responsible for this organization, because it feels like our project, and something that we've poured so much love and effort into. We genuinely want it to succeed. And so while it can get difficult, and I think sometimes it's easy to get overworked, and I'm not saying you should burn yourself out. You should definitely have limits when you turn the computer off and focus on your own mental well-being and physical well-being. I think we actually derive a lot of energy from this, and because we care about what we're doing, it doesn't feel like a chore or like a job. It feels like something worthwhile that we want to give more and more time to.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything Zabreen said. I think the other thing, and I was reading something about this a few days ago as well, is having a team, and I think having a co-founder or someone who is equally responsible for the organization or whatever you're building as you are. I think that's very helpful, because everyone has ups and downs, and times when you can take out more time out of your core responsibilities, and times when you can't. And so having someone who is equally in the game, or equally in that project, as equally as you are, is actually very helpful, and helps make it sustainable and make it manageable. So I think we've really benefited from having each other, and then having an amazing team of women that have helped us grow so quickly and build so much. I feel like if I was doing it alone, or if Zabreen was doing it alone, it would have been much, much harder. So I would say, even if you have an amazing idea, seek out a friend or a colleague, or someone who feels as passionate as you do about whatever it is that you want to build. And then take the plunge with someone, so that you have a little bit more support than if you were doing it yourself.
Yeah, just like any startup, you have good days and then you have difficult days. So you need someone to hold you and support you in those rainy days.
Yeah.
So there's no, you just cannot emphasize enough on the importance of having a good team member.
Yeah.
That's great. So um, if someone wants to join you, wants to offer their time as a volunteer, um, how can they help and how can they contact you?
So we've included some, I mean, for those of you that can see the slide that Fahad just put up, we've included some information here. So there's our Instagram handle, and then for the other social media platforms that we're on, I would highly encourage you to follow us. On our Instagram, our Twitter, we post information about any upcoming events we have, any new resources that are available, any kind of group sessions or more targeted programming that we're doing. So that is a very easy way to remain updated with what we are doing as an organization and for you to take advantage of that. The other thing I would say is if you're interested in joining the team, if you have, skills that you want to provide, definitely email us. And our email address is on the slide, but it's just hello@hercapital.org. And so we would love to hear from you. And even if you want to support the mission or give us advice, I mean, Zabreen and I joke, but we've just built this organization, and I think we've just been lucky in how positive the response has been. But we are always looking for advice and for suggestions from people that are more seasoned entrepreneurs or have built something over a longer time frame and have more experience. So if you think you can offer us your advice or your services, please email us. We would love to set up a call and learn from what it is that you know.
Great. So Rabia and Zabreen, it was an absolute pleasure to have you both on this session. We wish you all the best with this mission. I call this more like a grassroots movement. Uh,
Love
you,
that.
you're taking one person at a time, and everyone we know in the family been through this. They have these challenges. In general, women like to keep the cash. They feel more safe, and not the case with the men. So wish you all the best. You have all the support of Open, and we'll hope to see you at Open conference later this year.
Thank you so much, Fahad. Thank you for
Yeah.
having us, and we're excited to stay involved with Open.
Great. Take
Thank you.
care. Have a wonderful weekend.